I don't know much about your life beyond these warm walls, the fleeting sense of love within these God-forsaken halls. And you can't hear it in his voice, in every call. This mare who slept 100 years had something after all. It's funny how empty I feel after the fight. For as much as they hurt me and as badly as they'd hurt Frosty, I didn't feel angry. When the time came to shoot, I did. There were no emotions to it. After everything I'd learned about myself, and for as much as I knew about the flames inside me, they wanted to claw the way out, I was perfectly calm in those moments. I could feel the flames I carried inside of me still, but they hadn't flared once in the chaos. And that worried me. Admiring the universe? Proteus spoke up from beside me. I hadn't seen or heard him come up by me, and frankly, that was annoying. What? I snorted and glanced at his cheery expression. There's nothing interesting for blocks on end. Just the same dull, gray wasteland that's always been there. I returned my gaze to the road ahead. Nothing here to admire. It was a joke. He hoofed his hoof around my neck and pulled himself into my personal space. You were staring off into space, you see. I assumed you had something heavy on your mind, so I attempted to make you smile. Nah, nothing heavy, I sighed. Actually, it's pretty light. I looked up and smiled at him. He merely shot a look at me like I'd stopped halfway through. Light. You know. Fire. Now my explanation changed his expression into one of concern. It was a joke. Right. He nodded slowly and removed his hoof from around my neck. He kept his eye on me as he went back to walking beside me normally. Well, I'm glad to hear you are all right. My patch-up job holding together? Yeah. I pulled my coat back as he walked and looked over my bandaged side. He'd only healed the compound part of the fracture with a potion, but my ribs were still broken in my chest. Thanks Celestia for Med-X. It's not uncomfortable, but I'm going to need some actual treatment when we get there. I glanced back at the wagon. After we get Frosty all patched up, that is. At least Fruit had been able to stabilize her for the time being. Where did you learn how to do that? Shadow's voice came from my other side. He made me jump from the suddenness, and that made my ribs hurt. I shot him an annoyed glare to find him hovering beside me so close that when I did, I'd shoved my nose against his. First of all, personal space, I said with a grunt. I pushed him away, watching him drift back for a second with a nervous look. Second of all, you shouldn't start halfway through a thought. Some goddess-damned context might help. Honestly, I shouldn't have given him a hard time about it. From how he giddily talked about taking out a couple of those raiders, I should be thankful that he was here to help. Sorry. He sputtered and tried to regain his train of thought. I was asking about how you were fighting. You cleared a whole building like it was nothing, and you stared down the other mare without even flinching. I knew combat veterans of the academy who couldn't do it as effectively as you did. It's something you get good at fast down here, or you die, I said as I turned my back to look towards the road again. Up ahead, I could see the edge of Tenpony Tower creep over around the corner of one of the ruins as we approached it. Even with some pony teaching you, if you don't have the reflexes or the smarts, you're done for. So, who taught you? He asked simply. To him, that question was just like any other he'd asked. I wasn't sure if I should feel insulted that he'd insinuated that I needed help. It was true that I had help, but he didn't understand the gravity of what he asked. He didn't get it. The wasteland is cruel, and even those who have mastered it end up in the dirt some days, all the same. Come on there, Romeo. Harmony spoke up from behind me. I think that there's enough questioning for one day. Her heavy steps pushed up aside of him as she trod up next to me. At least she had the decency to be loud when she came to my side. Sides, we're almost at Tenpony. Y'all best be getting your things ready. 'cause there ain't a short list of things we need done there. Harmony? I looked up to her and watched as she smiled. Do you really think your mother can help? If we couldn't somehow acquire a ship to go after the necromancer, it was all over. Between the story she's told me, and the fact that she's the meanest mare you could ever seen when she was wanting something, she looked at me in the eyes when she spoke. You can bet your flang that she'll be getting you something to help. Yep, I can agree with that, Fruitcup said as he trotted behind us. I looked back and watched as he smiled tiredly at us. Your mother always was the one who did what needed to be done, no matter what the cost. She stood by what she knew was right. He let off a sigh that I wasn't sure was regretful or happy. It was a sad day when she left the Rangers, but we all knew that it would be better for you and Shortstaff in the long run. Hey! A familiar voice of a certain striped asshole I knew called out from up ahead of us. It took you all long enough. Fija spoke up from the corner of the building next to the 10-pony parking lot. The closer we got, the less open the lot looked. There were tents of refugees camped all out around 10-pony. Several barrel fires burned brightly as the ponies around them tried to stay warm. A few foals ran about giggling and tossing snowballs at each other. It was a much different sight from the one of Sunset City. The ponies here looked less ragged and starving. Now I could see why Shortstaff had been doing daily runs between 10-pony and the garage. These ponies had more than enough to go around. Hey, asshole! Gage called out. My mom almost died getting us here, so shut your fucking striped muzzle before I rip it off you. Gage, watch your language. Fruitcup growled and turned to her. For some reason, even though he was mad, it didn't carry the same weight as when Frosty had told her the same. With a grumble, he turned back to Ficha and held out a hoof. Sorry. Racism is an occupational trait she picked up. I apologize for her manners. Not the first time, he said with a smile. Besides, all my best friends insult me. He paused and stuck his neck out as I walked by. Isn't that right, mon chéri? Not in the mood today, asshole. I shot him an annoyed look and walked right past him. I didn't care if I proved his point. I just wanted to get inside. Both Harmony and I pushed through the crowded lot. In some regards, even though they looked healthier, there felt like there were more ponies here than at Shunsine. A few of them called out to us as we passed, asking for spare bits or food, but I didn't spare them even a glance. Harmony let out a small chuckle as we approached the steps of the tower. She waved her hoof to the cream-colored stallion who stood in front of the door, out front. Hey, oil can! She cheerfully called out as she climbed the stairs. Been a good while since I last seen you or your sister. She walked up and hugged the Pegasus stallion, who blushed at the embrace. By the way, how's Dipstick holding up? Dad? Oh, you know, this cold makes his wings ache. He averted his eyes with a smile and rubbed at his mane nervously. Mother does what she can, but Drip Pan and I are looking into finding some pony who can do some surgery to help. His smile grew as he looked down at Harmony. Goddesses. He had a crush on her, and he couldn't hide it to save his life. How are you? You know, Doc Stibbits, back at the bunker, is a whiz with an auto-doc. Fruitcup called out as he climbed the steps. It drew the strained gaze of the Pegasus to him, and nearly wiped the smile from his muzzle. I might be able to ask if he could make a trip over here for you. Really? That'd be great, though we don't have a lot of caps saved up yet. His eyes brightened as he thought about it. But if there's anything we can do, we will make sure to scrounge up enough for you. He seemed to relax for a moment before he looked down at Harmony. His blush returned in an instant, and I let out a sigh of boredom. Now, what can I do for you today, Harmony? We need to see my mother, Harmony said in a rather soft tone. She twisted her hoof against the concrete under her, and blushed as brightly as he did. Can you call her for me? Wow, that was either the most convincing acting I've ever seen, or she genuinely liked him. Knowing how well Harmony could haggle, honestly I wasn't sure which one it was. I can't let you in. But not with them. He pointed over to us. Sorry, tower orders. He was cut short by a buzzing sound coming from the intercom beside him. He reached over quickly and flipped the switch to it. Oil? Is there some problem with the ponies at the door? The voice of an older mare came through with an accusatory tone. Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like it's my daughter and her friends. Her voice sounded extra crisp for the last sentence. Oilcan straightened himself as he spoke. It is your daughter, ma'am. He spoke up with a worse stutter than before. She may enter, but her friends are fine to enter. She snipped through the box over his shoulder. Just keep out any pony who looks like they'll cause any trouble. From what I can see, they have an injured pony with them. There was a soft crackle as Oil nodded and reached a hoof to the door. Oh, and Oil. He froze up. If you intend to keep an interest in my daughter, after your shift, we'll need to talk. Oil's mane practically stood on end as she continued. I'll need you to come up to my office. I could hear the enjoyment she was getting from this coming through the speaker. You know, where I keep all my guns. Yes, ma'am. He nodded quickly as he sweat bullets. You're free to come in. He gave us all the more nervous smile he had as he pulled open the door. Sorry about Mama. Harmony spoke up as she moved towards the door. She leaned over and landed a peck on his cheek. I swore that the way his legs shook, he was about to pass out. I didn't care so much, though, as I followed Harmony inside. Once we'd gotten down the entranceway, she turned to me with a smile. Don't get me wrong, he's a nice stallion and all. She sighed. I just ain't ready to settle down. Even more so now that Dodge ain't around and even Manhattan is on edge. She looked up at me with a real fear in her eyes. Y'all think we can really get those things back to normal? I hope so. I muttered softly. I really do. It was a kind of surreal feeling as I walked through the halls of this place. No pony looked like they cared about the outside world, and just carried on like it didn't exist. Gage and Fruit both escorted Frosty up to the clinic, which was where I'd go after we'd met with Harmony's mom. Meanwhile, Preet and Shadow had broken off as we reached the main shop foyer to go get some much-needed supplies for our trip. As I'd watched Shadow walk away, I couldn't help but think about what he'd said last night. I walked over to Harmony as we entered the elevator. She could have any stallion she wanted, any mare she wanted, but she didn't want anything at all. Sure, I'd had plenty of stallions who'd wanted a night with me, but none of them loved me like the stallions who want Harmony. Other than being a little rough around the edges, what was wrong with me? Am I not good enough for some pony? Storm? Harmony asked abruptly. You all right there? You're as red as a ripe tomato. I scrunched up my muzzle as I realized that I was feeling jealous of Harmony. I hadn't realized that I was blushing, but now I could feel the glow on it on my cheeks. I looked at the floor as I brushed my mane with a hoof. Yeah, I'm just thinking. I managed to squeak out. Oh, really? I could hear the snark in her voice as she said that. Care to tell me about who? No, pony. I said and glanced up at her as I caught her bright grin. Oh, she better not be using that silver tongue of hers to pry this out of me. She promised she'd never do that. It's not important. Well, good, she replied smartly. 'Cause if it's that Pegasus fellow, I don't rightly trust him. She shrugged and nudged my shoulder. Especially after he knocked you out last night. What? No, he didn't. I snapped at her in concern. How could she think that he'd hurt me? I fell asleep warming his hooves is all. Immediately I snapped my hooves to my muzzle and held it closed. Too late. The damage had been done. I should not have told her that. Oh, no, that's just too good. She giggled like a filly. The elevator gave a light ding as we reached the right level. The double doors rolled back just in time for her to double over out of the box in laughter. I stomped out in annoyance as she rolled about the floor in hysteria. I knew that you wouldn't be able to resist him when y'all are all alone. What? I paused and looked back at her. What do you mean you knew? Hon, We had plenty of time before you showed up, she said as she wiped the tears of joy away from her cheeks. The way he talked about you, you'd think you were mistaken for one of them goddesses. Yeah, well, I told him last night I'm not looking for some pony to love. I grumbled and waited for her to get herself straightened out again. Even though she's pretty much family, sometimes I just wanted to smack that mare. Then again, I haven't seen her smile like that since I came back. Goddesses, it must feel good to laugh like that. A click came from down the hall as the door to the security office opened. Thank you, Longbow. It means a lot to me. Skyline sniffled as she walked out. Even if it were just memories. She rubbed at her eyes with her wingtips. She wore the hint of a smile across her muzzle before she looked at me. I'll see you later, Longbow. Skyline, I started to speak up, but she simply turned and galloped down the hall away from us. My heart sank as she did so. I didn't know if there would have even been anything to say. I just hated what I'd taken from her. Ours was an impossible task, but how could I just give up? I was supposed to be the embodiment of hope itself, and if I sat back and watched things crumble, what chance does everybody else have? I just wish that it wasn't my friends that had to pay for the necromancer's sins. Hey now, you can't be letting those thoughts into your head, Harmony said as she walked up and threw her hoof around my neck. I know you think it was your fault, but it wasn't. That bastard who's going around hurting ponies did it, and feeling sorry for things that you can't change ain't gonna fix it now. Now is it? She tugged forward and forced me to step up with her. Now, let's see what Mama can do to help us stop that deranged stallion before any pony else suffers. I could only nod as we walked forward down the hall. I didn't know what it was, but even though I didn't want to walk, Harmony's pull was too much to resist. Even being an earth pony like me, I didn't think that she had that kind of strength. I looked up at her as she walked us along. She looked more terrified to walk into the room with each step. She put on a strong face for me, but I knew as well that we didn't have much of a chance from where we stood. She knew, but she put on a brave face for me. Like me, she knew it had to be done, and she knew that I needed her strength, so she lent it to me. A part of that clicked with me, and I felt the flame that I carried inside at night. Daddy was right. I didn't need the strength of my friends to fight, but the hope I carried inside did. Somewhere I hoped that Daddy was smiling at me now that I had finally figured it all out. It's good to see you again, Harmony, Longbow said as she leaned against her plush command chair. You as well, Storm. The security room was a fairly sparse place. She sat behind a large curved desk with a soft smile. For a unicorn in her late 50s or early 60s, her eyes didn't reflect the same sparkle that Skyline's had. She looked tired. Her now gray and light blue striped mane hung off the side of her head, and she looked as tired as she was. To her right sat a bank of monitors and controls. The upper 4 monitors displayed a rotating section of all the tower's internal cameras, while the bottom 2 showed a section of options, codes, and guidelines that could be selected through with the keypad next to them. I've missed you, Harmony said with a smile, escorting the both of us to a pair of chairs that sat on the other side of her desk. We both grabbed a seat and took a moment to get comfortable. When I looked back up, I found Longbow's gaze had shifted to an image on one of the 4 monitors. She let out a sigh. In what looks to be a new record, Shortstaff seems to have started an argument between himself and Gruer. She gave a weak smile and looked over to Harmony. Can you do me a favor and go get him? I'm going to have to remind him that he has to give in sometimes and not argue about every little cap out of some pony. Yeah, Harmony groaned as she stood back up. Don't y'all worry, I'll get him up here even if I have to drag him up kicking and screaming. She turned back to the door and trotted out. As she did, Longbow's levitation slowly shut the door behind her. I looked back to see her squinting and rubbing her head. Oh, it's been a long time since I've had to deal with this much stress. She sighed and relaxed a bit as she brushed her mane out of the way. It's also been such a long time since I've seen a look like that on a pony's face. Her tone dropped like a brick of lead as she gave me a stern look. Tell me, what do you know about what's going on? Well, it's not going to be a simple explanation. I started with a sigh of my own. And not all of it will probably sound believable. Try me. I've seen plenty of impossibilities in my time, Longbow said as she pressed her hooves together on her desk. And you know I can tell if a pony's lying or not. I took a long breath and looked down at my hooves. My pip-buck shifted to pink as pie popped up in my vision. She smiled and sat there with what looked like a carton of popcorn as she too waited for me to start. So, I don't know if my parents ever told you, but I'm not their filly. I started, not taking my eyes off my hooves. I didn't want to know how crazy Longbow thought I was. My parents found me as a filly. I'm a weapon, created during the war that was locked away in a pre-war facility called an orchard. There was a click that came from across the room. I looked up to see Longbow's face had fallen into a grimace. Harmony told me that she'd once had an issue with a mare who came out of an orchard, so I should have suspected her reaction. She didn't move a muscle as she sat. She simply waited for me to continue. I was created using a DNA sample from each of the ministry mares. There was a theory that if I shared a bond with each of the ministry mares, that I could use these elements of harmony if one of them was ever killed in the war. I kept my gaze locked onto her trembling eyes. When I failed to control the elements, something went wrong. I remembered the faces as I talked about them. There was a fire, and some of the scientists were killed. They locked me away for it and forgot about me. I could feel myself start to cry as I recalled the look on Mama's face. Until my parents woke me up. Enough. Longbow finally spoke. She lifted the gun up to the side of my head, pressed the cold barrel against me. You know that my talent is judgment. Is that correct? She nearly spat at me as she stood up. I simply nodded and looked at her cutie mark. That was a set of weighed scales that never seemed brighter to me. Then you need to hope that I don't find anything in there that will give me a reason to pull this trigger. She took a deep breath before she put her horn to my forehead. How far back? About a month. I spoke as I felt my body stiffen up. Everything's been so hectic, so I can't give you a specific day. Her horn flashed and I felt an odd sensation. For a moment, I felt like I was turned inside out before everything returned. I was disoriented, but when I came to again, I found myself inside of a familiar-looking shack. Oh yeah, don't think I'm doing this for free. I felt myself speak. This was when I rescued Stratos and his daughter. I had to wonder if this was what a memory orb felt like for normal unicorns. Being in my own body and not being in control of it was a very uncomfortable feeling. It was different from being inside the necromancer's mind, though. I could still feel everything. If that was right, though, I didn't like what came next. Just like it had originally done, as I ran towards the gate that led out of the raiders' camp, a small metal apple flew through the air. It landed in the same way it had, and I felt the same fear course through my body. As it exploded, the pain was something I only remembered for a second before I blacked out. It was just the start of my journey, but I had no idea how bad it would get before I arrived here. Before I could worry about having to relive through everything in real time, my memory stuttered. A rush of noise filled my mind, and my body was racked with pain. A vision was a blur, constantly shifting and reforming as the torrent of noise only picked up. I wanted to scream from the scrambling thoughts and the pain they applied. Was this part of what Longbow did? Did she find enough cause to judge me irredeemable? The noise, lights, and the pain all came to a crescendo. It was maddening. I fought against my mind to give me back control of my body. As I let out the loudest scream, the connection to Longbow's horn was severed. I came to as I fell back onto the moldy carpet of the security office. My heart raced in my chest, and my broken ribs screamed for me to get off of them. Hot tears ran down my face as I gasped in heavy breaths. There was a heavy thump next to my head. I turned to find Longbow's gun laid on the floor next to me. "Oh, goddesses," she whispered. She stumbled over to her desk and fell into her chair, staring wide-eyed at me. Slowly she wiped at her cheek, brushing away the stream of tears she too had. "I'm sorry. I'd shared everything you felt the whole time. I never imagined. I tried to help." I forced myself to say weakly. I couldn't do anything to help. Maybe I can. Longbow spoke as she stiffened up. I had just hoped to never see a day like this again, but it seems that another mad pony has their grip on the wasteland. Whatever it is you need. The necromancer spoke of an item that he needed. I spoke up with a heavy groan. My side felt like the doctor at the prison had been tinkering around with it. I really needed to see that doctor after this. The pony and his daughter I'd saved from the slavers all the way back. Then, the necromancer is forcing him to use a boat. If Stratus doesn't do as he's asked, the necromancer is going to kill his daughter. But where is it they're going? Longbow said as she squeezed her eyes shut and rubbed at her horn. It was at this point that I noticed that the tip of Longbow's horn was smoking in stark black. It must have taken a lot of magic to condense all those memories into the space of time. It is in some sort of storm to the northeast. Gingerly, I set myself back down in the chair. It didn't help much, but the fact that I had stopped moving again kept my sides from killing me anymore. A perpetual tempest, he'd said. You know, Mother used to tell me that there was a storm like that. A fearsome tempest that was unrelenting and undying. Longbow said as she took off her own pain and looked back at me. Her eyes weren't filled with hatred and judgment anymore. The only thing I got from them was pity and sorrow. She said that its weather was so strong that there wasn't any surface ship the Rangers would send that wouldn't sink within minutes into the storm. It's a force that was so strong that even the Enclave couldn't get control of it. So, it's a real place then? I simply asked. She nodded softly with a sigh. That was the best news I've had all day. Is there any way? I leaned forward and winced as my side reminded me that I shouldn't move. Any way at all that you could get me into the center of that storm? She leaned back into her chair and pressed her hooves against the side of her head. I vaguely remember that my mother had petitioned the Elder to take the Nautilus into it, but she was denied on the spot. They couldn't risk losing the submarine in Equestria on a trip into the unknown. She looked up to me again and offered a weak smile. But, with what I've seen through you, I'm 100% sure that I could convince Elder Maple to send it in. I let out a breath that I didn't realize I'd been holding. Yet again, my ribs bucked at me, and said I shouldn't even be doing that to them. I didn't care. We had our boat. You really think I could get us there? A smirk somehow found its way across my muzzle as I spoke. As she nodded, I felt it grow into a genuine smile. Well, if anything, it's your best chance. She pushed herself back from her desk and stood up. And with Captain Doppler at the helm, I'm sure she can find a way through. She stopped midway through her sentence and adopted a confused look that she carried between me and the floor. Are you bleeding? I looked down to my hooves to find that a small line of crimson running down them. A few drops dropped onto the floor beside me. With a small whine, I lifted my jacket pocket and looked at my ribs. To my dismay, one of them had found their way outside my body again. No wonder it hurt so damn much. Yeah, I meant to get Thatched finished. I grunted. Suddenly, I felt lightheaded again. If it's all right with ya, I think I'm... That was when the world began to spin, and I dropped to the floor. Now that I thought of it, I had lost a lot of blood, and the health potion I'd gotten could only do so much. Come on, Longbow grunted as she walked over. Even without her horn, she was strong enough to pick me up and carry me. Being lightheaded didn't stop me from being in pain, and my side felt like some pony holding a brand to my coat. Quit whining. You're an earth pony. I know you can endure more than that. Let's just get you down to the clinic before you lose a limb. She muttered. Goddess knows how often that happened in my life. Yeah, they all feel in the right place. I grunted as I hopped off the examination table. I wasn't too much of a fan of the idea of using the Hydra to fix my side. It was either that or wait for them to heal naturally. As good of an idea as that might have been, the Necromancer didn't have 8 weeks to wait. So neither did I. Well, you're free to go then. Peroxide rolled her eyes and rolled her latex hoof glove off. Try and at least be more careful out there. With the amount of old, healed injuries that I found on you, it's a mystery to me how you aren't dead. That was actually a valid point, seeing as I'd technically died already. Don't worry, Doc. I sighed. I'm right there with you. I slid my jacket off the end of the table and slipped it on. For once, my body didn't complain when I torqued and twisted it. Prettius tapped his hoof impatiently behind me as I shimmied my jacket into its rightful place. Are you ready to go, or are we still waiting on everyone else? I asked him, trying my hardest to convey my own annoyance. Well, we're still waiting on a few, he sighed. But there is still a matter of tasteless to attend to. He motioned for me to follow him. I hadn't really been listening when he'd explained it. But all I know is that she'd been taken into a holding room by tower security. With a nod to the nurse, I followed Prettius out into the second-floor hallway that overlooked the shops below. I looked into the Tenpenny Towers restaurant as we trotted past it. Sitting at a table and looking fairly ashamed was Gage. Frosty sat next to her, with her head wrapped in white bandages, and her angry mutterings could almost be heard through the glass that enclosed the place. Fruitcup simply sat there, being the only pony within 3 tables' distance seemingly to enjoy his meal. As quickly as my comfort in knowing that they were all right there it was gone again as we passed the restaurant. As we went downstairs and headed towards the holding office, there was a pair of extra guards standing outside the door. I felt a pit form in my stomach. Tell me, what exactly happened again? I said with the faintest hope that she hadn't murdered any pony. Well, you see, she was in the fancy clothes store at the end of the foyer down there, he said with a point of his hoof. Lots of expensive things there that were able to be broken, I bet. I already didn't like where this was heading. She'd been making fun of the dull classic music that they were playing in there when she'd started to dance. He cringed and lowered her ears. While she single-hoofedly ruined the elegance of a waltz, she tried to twirl herself. His words drifted off as he face-hoofed. She one of yours? Drip Pan asked with an annoyed tone as she let out a long sigh. I nodded slowly as she opened the door with her magic. I should have known. I'm being honest. Tasteless scoffed to the mare, taking down her statement. Had I known the bolt holding my tail was on loose, I wouldn't have spun like that. She looked up to me and rolled her eyes. I simply sighed in disappointment as she continued talking to the officer. How was I supposed to know it was going to fly off and hit the old coot in the face? She got to her hooves and pulled the table she was handcuffed to over to us. Hey, don't fucking judge me. It's not like I killed the bitch. May I present Elegance Incarnate? Prettius grumbled. Chapter end. And though I know, since you've awoken her again, she depends on you. She depends on you. Quests finished. Storm takes Manhattan. Quest started. Into the storm. Levels earned none. Perks earned none.